Jumpin Jack Flash. The thunder cracked violently across the evening sky, splitting the clouds like a wound, bleeding rain over the forgotten town of Ashfield. Jack Calloway walked through the muddy back roads, his black boots sinking into the muck, but he didn't slow down. The storm didn't bother him. It never had. After all, when you've been through hell, what's a little rain? Jack had always been a drifter. His life was a patchwork of scars and secrets, woven together by places he'd rather forget. He'd been born in a decrepit shack on the outskirts of town, where the windows rattled in the wind and the walls leaked more than they sheltered. His mother used to hum sad songs while peeling potatoes, and his father, a shadowy figure reeking of tobacco and bitterness, barely acknowledged him. Life was survival, and survival meant leaving. He left when he was 16, hitched rides on freight trains, worked odd jobs, and slept in barns, alleys, and abandoned cars. Along the way, he learned that life could break a man and rebuild him, but only if that man was stubborn enough to keep moving. And Jack was stubborn. Some called him reckless, others called him lucky, but Jack knew the truth. He was reborn the moment he left Ashfield. His old life had been buried there, but the storm tonight seemed to be calling it back to life. The road led him past the ruins of the old mill, its skeletal frame silhouetted against the stormy sky. It had been abandoned for years, but the memories it held were still alive. Memories of the days when Jack and the other local boys dared each other to climb its crumbling towers. They'd laugh, spit on the ground below, and pretend they weren't terrified. Back then, Jack wasn't brave. He was just trying to survive the way he always had, by faking it. As he approached the bridge over the swollen river, lightning lit up the world around him, casting shadows on the trees that looked like clawed hands reaching for his soul. His coat flapped wildly in the wind, but he kept moving. The bridge groaned under his weight, and for a brief moment, he wondered if it would collapse, dragging him down into the churning water below. But it didn't. Jack smiled grimly. Of course it didn't. He was Jumpin Jack Flash, after all, and nothing could bring him down. He didn't know when he'd earned the nickname, but it had stuck. Maybe it was because he always seemed to escape danger just in time, leaping from disaster to safety like a cat with 9 lives. Or maybe it was because of that night in Memphis, when he'd outrun the cops after a bar fight, laughing like a madman as he vaulted over fences and dived through alleyways. The world had tried to crush him, but he'd always found a way to land on his feet. But tonight was different. Tonight, the town was pulling him back, whispering secrets through the wind and the rain. He passed the church, where he'd once hidden from a storm just like this one, praying to a god he didn't believe in. The steeple was crooked now, its paint peeling like the town's forgotten dreams. Jack lit a cigarette under the shelter of a boarded-up storefront and exhaled, watching the smoke disappear into the night. He thought about all the places he'd been: New York, Chicago, Detroit. He'd been a dishwasher, a mechanic, a boxer, and a singer in a blues band that never made it past dive bars. But through it all, he'd never come back. Not until tonight. He wasn't sure why he'd returned. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was the pull of unfinished business. Either way, he knew he wouldn't stay long. The past was a weight he refused to carry. As he flicked the cigarette into a puddle, a familiar voice called his name. He turned, and there she was. Emily, the girl who used to sit with him on the school steps, sharing stolen apples and dreams of running away. Her hair was wet, clinging to her face, but her eyes still had that fire he remembered. "Didn't think I'd see you again," she said, her voice soft but steady. Jack smiled, a real smile this time. Neither did I. For a moment, they just stood there, the rain washing away the years between them. Then, without a word, they walked together down the empty street, their footsteps echoing like the beat of a distant drum. Jack didn't know where the road would lead him next, but it didn't matter. He was still Jumpin Jack Flash, and the world couldn't stop him. The storm was just another reminder of what he already knew. He'd been through fire, flood, and famine, and he'd survived it all. But as he leaped over a gaping hole in the cracked pavement, barely avoiding a speeding car that skidded through the rain-soaked street, he realized there was one thing he might not outrun: Emily. He had escaped everything life had thrown at him. But love, that was the one thing he had never been able to shake. And as she clutched his hand, breathless from the near miss, he knew that this time, maybe he wouldn't try.